Hello and welcome to Warframe Unabridged. I'm your host Fen, and today we're going to continue our journey through the power kit of Nezha. But today we're going to take a step in a different direction for a change, and break away from anything that might be perceived as meta, as we examine a loadout that we at Warframe Unabridged have dubbed the Exilus Princess. Now for this loadout, we will be discussing Nezha, the boy on fire, but I've got to give a shout out to Polygon Monster for his work with the Nezha Divine skin, which could be yours for free. See details towards the end of the video. But before we jump into the loadout for the Exilus Princess, let's talk about Exilus within the progression of Warframe. Now it's old news at this point that Digital Extremes caved under the pressure of players who weren't really good enough to get by with the standard 8 mod slots, and it gave birth to the Exilus slot. At the time, many players had feared that this would effectively be a form of power creep, and when the Exilus slot came out, we were at that time limited to mods that most people didn't use in the first place, and it kinda just became a mod slot that everybody just really used for rush. Looking around at that point in time, that's all anybody ever used it for, was some extra sprint speed. Now sometime later, our fears of power creep were realized as the drift mods came out, and we received mods that would enhance power range, power strength, and your energy pool at no cost to the 8 slots that we had for our actual build. Now the only cost it came with was additional drain, but we have Forma, so drain is never really an issue to begin with. So we now had 3 mods that did contribute, in point of fact, to power creep. Now some would challenge this notion, stating that bonuses of these mods are pretty insignificant, and so it's not an issue of power creep. But I would rebut this fallacious point to say that these people simply don't understand what power creep is. So how can we identify something like power creep? Well, ask yourself the following question. Before the drift mods were released, did the game previously have caps that you could now surpass without any cost to what you had before? If the answer is yes, then it's power creep. More to the point, power strength, for example, already had 3 mods, and since the Exilus mod Power Drift was released, we've also received mods like growing power and energy conversion. Now, why the latter two do not contribute to power creep is because they require a sacrifice. For every slot that you use on those, it takes away from something else, meaning no corrosive projection or energy siphon if you wanted to use growing power. It could mean that you have to forma the slot as well. Now, energy conversion, that requires a pretty good sacrifice. It's a fairly expensive mod, and it also requires a difference in gameplay. You have to collect more orbs to get the most benefit out of it. But in addition to that, it uses one of your 8 core mod slots, one less for other mods that people use for their fundamental mod slots. So there is little sacrifice at all for drift mods at that point. Power Drift may take away from your Exilus slot, but keep in mind that people wanted this free slot in order to equip a mod that they simply would not use when they had access to mods that would enhance power strength or range or increase your energy. The Exilus slot was pleaded for with arguments such as, go ahead, tell me you would equip Maglev over Intensify. Well, naturally, this is a fallacious comparison. If I feel that a frame is in need of power strength, I'm going to keep Intensify, but I may forego a mod that's defensive in nature, as Maglev can contribute to survivability in another way, like aiding you in moving quickly enough so that you won't be hit in the first place. Now, let's take a step back and look at the mods that are available for the Exilus slot. Now, of the power creep mods, we have Cunning Drift, Endurance Drift, and Power Drift. Among the other drift mods, we have Speed Drift, Agility Drift, Coaction, and Stealth Drift. Now for Bullet Jump, I'm not going to list them all, but suffice it to say that there's 8 different mods that all enhance your parkour maneuvers like bullet jumps, only one of which can be equipped at any given time. So there's kind of balance there. It doesn't let you stack and stack and stack to the point where you're just soaring through the sky. But what's interesting about it is you can change the form of damage that it does, or you can equip one that's significantly cheaper, Mobilize, and you still gain the boost to the jump without having to polarize the slot to make it fit. Now for movement, you have the infamous Maglev, Patagium, you have Rush, and Streamlined Form. And for alternate forms of resistance, you could use Aviator, Shock Absorber, Sure-Footed, and Warm Coat. Now for alternate forms of utility, there's Enemy Sense, Handspring, Heavy Impact, Intruder, Master Thief, Pain Threshold, Retribution, and Thief's Wit. Now finally, there are 2 augments that actually fit in there, and that's just Escape Velocity and Hysterical Assault at the time this video was recorded. Now most of these are mods that nobody really has any business equipping, assuming they follow the typical meta of the game, but that doesn't mean that they're without use, as we will demonstrate in the following loadout, which will probably make your meta-only frame players cringe in disgust. Behold, the Exilus Princess. For this build, we will use Aviator, Agility Drift, Speed Drift, Natural Talent, our one non-Exilus mod, Patagium, Heavy Impact, endurance drift, streamlined form, coaction drift, and we rotate our aura depending on the enemy faction. Now for Corpus, we use EMP aura. For Infested, we'll use Infested impedance, and unfortunately the Grineer have no aura that provides a roadblock towards their performance, but corrosive projection is a good alternative to produce more damage against them. Now for our primary, we will use the lens, but honestly any launcher style weapon with a large AoE is good for this. For our secondary, we either equip the Furus or we use the Sonic Cord, depending on the scenario. Now for our melee weapon, we will use the Telos Boltus. For arcanes, we will equip Consequence to sustain our flight, and since you're aiming for the head anyway, we might as well equip Arcane Precision unless you are particularly energy hungry, in which case you could run with Energize. Now for focus, we use Vazarin for several reasons. Chief among them is the revives. When you have this much mobility, there's no reason somebody should bleed out because you couldn't get to them in time. Alternately, the shared affinity range drastically helps, not only if you're using your Furus, because that additional affinity range is going to help you get more affinity to supercharge that. It's one of the reasons why Syndicate weapons were so freaking powerful in any mission that had unlimited affinity range, like the old Draco. Essentially, you would supercharge your weapon because it didn't matter if you were a hallway hero or not, you would still get affinity regardless of how far your squad is. The rationale behind an Exilus build is one that can truly only be performed by a frame with already good mobility, and we use Nezha for this for several reasons. First among those is the advanced base sprint speed, which further enhances as you use Firewalker's enhancement to speed. Second is Nezha's ability to accelerate by sliding. If you see our video on Burning Summer, you will see a lot of quick acceleration simply by feathering the slide button, even thrusting forward from the walking position. You don't have to be running. It creates its own momentum. Now third is the lack of friction, which makes traveling through the air and sliding along the ground much quicker and effective. Fourth is the immunity to status granted to Nezha by his warding halo, which will prevent staggers, knockdowns, knockbacks, grappling from some enemies, and in some cases, even your own status effects. And if you're using the lens, that cold proc that traps you inside the blast radius can be a killer. This prevents that in many cases. Fifth and final is the teleportation effect granted by Nezha's Blazing Chakram, which will allow for some advanced maneuvers that no other frame can perform. Now this build is relatively ineffective on tile sets that are primarily interior, but it excels on outdoor tile sets, like on a Hyricon, where you have large open spaces to use. Now this tactique involves using Nezha's arsenal of maneuvers in a fashion that keeps you safe from harm by means of using air superiority. Now while airborne, we tend to use the lens, and since you're well above the blast radius, you can make safer use of weapons like this, or any self-damaging weapon. But for the best use, you want weapons that would explode on impact, on account of the fact that moving quickly through the air makes precision aiming a bit more difficult, especially when your aim is slowed by aim gliding, and you could wind up landing next to your Tonkwar grenade. Now we have the Furus equipped for some solid AoE damage and a little bit of self-healing, which comes in the form of lifesteal, as well as the current health increase and the base health increase. Now beyond that, it serves little purpose in the build, as the damage is lackluster. However, the quick bullet spam is guaranteed to activate your Arcane Consequence with ease. We have the Telos Boltus as well, which is actually a part of the tactique in a large way. If you frequent Hyricon, you know that you're going to do a lot of traveling. Now between all of Nezha's maneuvers, the complement of Exilus mods, the Arcane Consequence buff, and finally topped off by the additional movement granted by the Telos Boltus. With all of this, you're sure to get wherever you're going in record times. Now the Telos Boltus is also used as a form of posturing, and when I say that, I mean that you can use the primary spin effect to draw enemies in and stagger them, and with streamlined form to help you swap weapons quickly, you can fire off the lens at those CC'd enemies, or you can simply use the second spin to ragdoll them away. The choice is yours. I feel that this loadout and the Burning Summer loadout are two edges of the same coin. Burning Summer for interior missions, while Exilus Princess is for exterior missions. The ability to travel inside many dimensions, whether it's up, down, left, right, as well as the ability to soar high above the heads of your enemies, provides you a form of air superiority that's really hard for enemies to challenge. They just don't have enemies that are good at facing frames that can soar above them. Now this loadout compounds many effects so that you have the smallest possibility of not only being hit, but also taking damage, assuming someone does hit you. Above and beyond the actual speedy movement, which will reduce the odds of being hit in the first place, you have Aviator and Agility Drift, which together prevents over 50% of all incoming damage from happening. If facing the Corpus, you have the Evasion provided by Agility Drift, compounded with EMP Aura, which essentially makes them mentally deficient with any form of aiming. Now for Infested, they move awfully slow with Infested Impedance, but in the event that you land in a troubled area after soaring through the sky, well, Heavy Impact has you covered and will lay out nearby enemies so that they can't get to you before you recover from the fall. Now Endurance Drift helps you launch faster and further. Streamlined Form adds to your slippery nature while allowing you to seamlessly swap weapons. Coaction empowers your own aura, as well as the effect that other auras have on you, and between Speed Drift and Natural Talent, your powers are cast with such dexterity that you'll be spamming teleportation with ease. And with that being said, I do hope that you've enjoyed the latest installation of Warframe Unabridged. I realize that I do have a small community at the time, but I still want to do a little PS4 raffle giveaway type thing, including Nezha and the Circa helmet. But if you already have these items, I would be happy to instead gift you one of his Tenojin skins, including the Nezha Divine skin made by Polygon Monster, or the Nezha Yakska, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, skin by Faven and Silverbones. You need only comment your PlayStation in-game alias and include a fun fact about the mythological Nezha. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. I don't mind if you include something that you've seen someone else say, so long as it's in relation to Nezha. It could even be a third-party thing. It could be fanfic. I don't care. Just tell me a little bit about Nezha. And that's all there is to the Exilus Princess. You can follow me on Twitter using the link in the description. If you like what we do here, be certain to like the video, and maybe share the video if you think others can benefit from them. If you particularly love us, you can always hit the notification button for instant gratification. But until next time, this is Finn, signing off.